I really want to tell you about the secret backstory of mindfulness in America. Sharon reminded me. I met Sharon when she was 19. She had come overland. She was in India. She was from SUNY Buffalo. And I said to Sharon, I met her in Delhi, I said, you know, there's going to be a meditation retreat in Bodh Gaya. You might want to try it. She tried it. You can thank me now. Let me take you back to the 1970s. Anderson Cooper is just discovering Magilla gorilla. Soren has not yet been born. We're walking through a jungle outside Colombo, Sri Lanka. It's an ancient jungle. It's so ancient that there's a bamboo grove where the tree trunks are this thick, and the bamboo is about 200 feet high. And we're walking really mindfully through that jungle. One reason is we're going to see a monk, a Theravada monk named Nyanaponika, who at that time had written the only book in the English language, if you can imagine, that had the word mindfulness in the title. The other reason is that the jungle is home to a snake called a crate. It's about this long, very quick. You don't see them, but if they bite you, you're paralyzed in 30 seconds and die in 2 minutes. So it makes you really mindful. So we're walking along, and I wanted to study with Nyanaponika because I was studying clinical psychology. And in clinical psychology, you're taught how to assess what's wrong with a person. But in the psychological system that mindfulness comes from, it's all about what could be right, what we can develop, what we can cultivate, equanimity, compassion, caring about other people. So I studied that, and along the way I met some people you may have heard of. Joseph Goldstein, who was Sharon, and Jack Kornfield, and someone named Jackie Schwartz. Think about it. Goldstein, Kornfield, Schwartz, and Salzburg. There could be a law firm or a klezmer band, right? It actually turned out to be the Insight Meditation Society that they founded. And that's where another friend, John Kabat-Zinn, went to a course, a retreat, or maybe it was a prelude to those, and got a vision for something called mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was really the first time someone had seen that the benefits of mindfulness could be widely shared outside the original spiritual context, that it could help people alleviate pain, live better with suffering. So about that time, I go back to Harvard, where I'm studying clinical psychology, and I say to my professors, hey, you know what? There's this ancient psychology which is all about the upside of human potential. And they did not care at all. They're like, forget it, career-ending move, kid. So there was one person there, his name was Richard Davidson, another graduate student. He and I really cared about meditation. He did it and experienced it and knew in his bones that this was the thing to do. So we did our dissertations on meditation. At that time, there were 3 articles in the scientific literature that we could cite about meditation, very early days. Now, we've gone back and we've looked at the literature, and there are more than 6,000 peer-reviewed articles on meditation. So we did you a big favor. We sorted through. We found the very, very best. We winnowed it down to about 60. And those 60 articles are the ones in the book, Altered Traits. Now, let me circle back. One of the things that Richard Davidson and John Kabat-Zinn and I did way back in Cambridge was one of the first studies of an outstanding subject in meditation. At least we thought he would be an outstanding subject because he told us he would be. It was a Swami who came from India who wanted to be studied. This was in the heyday of what's called biofeedback, when people were first getting a signal like a heart rate or blood pressure, and they could find ways to raise it or lower it. And the Swami said to us, I can control my autonomic nervous system without any feedback. So we thought, oh, this is great. We finagled a lab at Harvard Medical School. We brought him in, and some other scientists, friends of ours, came, and we asked the Swami to raise his heart rate, and he lowered his heart rate. And we said, lower your heart rate, and he raised it. And then he did something, a special thing that he had mastered, which he called dog samadhi, and we call atrial fibrillation. It's not a good talent to have. So after that, the Swami, wherever he spoke, was sure to say, scientists at Harvard have studied my brain. This was when we first realized that meditation research could be hyped. And this was one of the motivators for us in using the most rigorous methodological standards to pare down the sea of findings. You know, you hear about them online and you hear about them in the news, but what really, from a scientific point of view, is the truth here? So let me tell you a few of the highlights. It's reviewed in detail in Altered Traits, but we look at 3 levels. The first level are the real professionals. These are people basically whose job it is to meditate all the time. You find them in Asia. They're monks, they're nuns, they're yogis. And you find them in Asia because Asian cultures understand that this has value. They support people in those institutions to do this. I know people like Jack Kornfield, who was a monk in Thailand, could not live here as a monk because, you know what, in Boston, you come to the door with a begging bowl, they call a cop. It's very different here. So the first level is kind of industrial strength meditation. And these people go very, very deep, but a very narrow band of people will do this. The next level out is what we find here in America, where you'll take a method that maybe the monks and the nuns and the yogis are doing full time, and you'll render it so that we folks, people who have day jobs, people who have responsibilities but can go on retreat, can learn it and do it. So that's the middle level. And then there's another remove, and John was, I think, the first to take this step, and that is to extract it from the spiritual context totally so that it can spread as widely as possible. These are the apps that they were talking about. These are mindfulness in business. And there, you may not go as deep, but it spreads, it goes to scale. It spreads as widely as it can. And I think there are benefits and trade-offs for each of those 3. So let me highlight some of the findings. Let's start with the yogis. These are the Olympic level meditators. Richard Davidson flew them over from Nepal or India or France one by one. He brought them to his brain lab at the University of Wisconsin, and he had them go through some brain scans and special tests. One of them, actually I was there for the first subject, who was a monk named Matthew Ricard. Do you know the name Matthew Ricard? Matthew was remarkable. Matthew got a PhD at the Pasteur Institute, which is like the MIT of France. He got it in microbiology, or was it microbiology? Molecular biology, thank you. And after getting his doctorate, and you know, his advisor won a Nobel, he was a very promising student, he decided to ditch that and go to Nepal and live with a great meditation master and spend his time in a hermitage. So it was when the Dalai Lama said at a meeting where Richie Davidson was and Matthew, the Dalai Lama says to Richie, you know, our tradition has many methods that help people with emotions when they become destructive, you know, out of control anxiety or anger or depression, whatever it may be. He said, take them out of the religious context, bring them to the lab, study them as rigorously as you can, and if they're a benefit to people, spread them widely. So Matthew, who thought he would never go back to science, decided he would collaborate with Richie. And this was very important because earlier Richie had gone to India with about 5,000 pounds of equipment, and it was equipped with a letter from the Dalai Lama saying, This guy's for real, please cooperate and be in a study. And he would schlep to some yogi in a cave and show him the letter, and the yogis universally said, no thanks. And the reason was interesting. They said, I don't know what you measure. And if it turns out I don't look so good on your measurements, maybe it will discourage people. In other words, they were worried about the impact it would have. So Matthew flipped that. He said to friends of his who were yogis, this is going to encourage a lot of people to meditate. This is going to be good for the world. Come do it. So about 21 have come. Matthew was the first subject, and the paradigm is like this. You're in an MRI. I don't know if you've been in an MRI. It's like a human cigar tube with a big clanking thing, like the garbage men are coming all the time. And you lie there, and you're told in this study, we'd like you to concentrate for 90 seconds, and then stop for 30 seconds, and then concentrate for 90 and stop for 30, like that 4 times. And then do it with visualization, and then do it with compassion, then do it with open presence. In other words, I don't know about you, but when I sit down to meditate, it takes my mind a little while to settle. He did it like that, and all of them did. In other words, they have extraordinary mental agility. Another thing that's remarkable is that, well, for example, if you have a creative insight, like, oh my God, I solved that thing. I know what to do now. I know the answer to that problem. Your brain at that moment will show a very strong magnitude EEG wave called a gamma. And it will last for about a half second, and it feels great. That's about the only time we see gamma. It happens a few other times, but always very short. The yogis have gamma virtually all the time. This was a true altered trait. Their brain function is different. Their brain, actually, how many people here have been long-term, like more than a year, and I do it almost every morning, and sometimes I go on retreat? Okay, so here's some good news. If you're in that category, the odds are that your brain aging is slower. It's not certain, but it looks like that. Another payoff, and this is really clear, if you do a mindfulness or insight practice or Zen, you're much more present moment to moment. And this is found on really tough cognitive tests that you can't game. Another benefit is the recovery from stress. Anderson was talking about his cortisol was up and so on. The scientific way of thinking about stress and resilience is what's the peak of the cortisol and how long does it take to return to calm? That's the operational definition of resilience. And the longer you've been a meditator, it seems, the quicker that recovery becomes. In fact, for all of the effects, there's what's called a dose response. The longer you've been a meditator, generally, the stronger the benefits become. So there's an attentional benefit, a stress benefit. One of the things that we're a little bemused by is that all of the spiritual traditions from which these meditation practices have come to America talk about how important it is to be selfless, to deconstruct the self, not to be I, me, mine focused. That turns out to be the least studied phenomena in all of the meditation research. There's somehow in this culture we don't really care that much about it. We rather increase our attention, our focus, recover better from stress. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a good thing if you're stressed and you're distracted. But it turns out there's a higher goal that is not often talked about. So that's the long-term benefits. And then there are the beginner benefits, and they turn out to be surprisingly pretty good. For example, that attention thing I talked about, you see that from people who do just 8 weeks of MBSR, or people who do mindfulness, or who just start and maybe do total 20 hours. The yogis, by the way, have done up to 62,000 lifetime hours, so 20 hours is just baby steps. But still, people get more attentive, their focus is better. When you multitask, as we were talking about with Tony Fadell and Anderson. The brain does not do that. It is, Anderson does, it just does one thing at a time. It switches very rapidly. It's a fiction that we do several things in parallel. And if you were concentrating on that one really important thing you have to do today, and your concentration is up here, and then you think, oh, I better check my email. People check email more than 70 times a day on average. Or I'll look at my Facebook more than 20 times a day. Or I'll do this and this and this and this. And you start surfing or wandering Facebook, and then you say, oh yeah, I have to do that thing. When you go back to it, ordinarily your concentration that was up here is now down here. Unless it turns out you did 10 minutes of mindfulness of the breath, like we did with Sharon. So the benefits start right at the beginning. Another attentional benefit is for students. In order to learn, you have to be able to register what you're hearing right now or reading right now, put it in long-term memory, and then be able to recall it. This is what we call learning, right? So when students at university were taught mindfulness, it turned out not only did their working memory improve, but that group of students got scores on the graduate school entrance exam that were 16 points higher. So it helps students learn. I'm going to circle back to this because I think that's a very important point. Also, you see the same stress recovery benefits, maybe not as strong as in the long-term meditators, but they're showing up. You don't get as upset, maybe you're triggered by fewer things. And then there's a remarkable effect from the practice Sharon is most associated with, the loving kindness meditation, where, how many people have done the loving kindness? Yeah, it's usually done with mindfulness traditionally, and it's a good way to end a mindfulness session. So in loving kindness, you wish well yourself and people you love and people you know in an ever-expanding circle. And it turns out, as Sharon alluded, this has very beneficial effects on the brain. It's not exactly what she was saying. It's not that you change the brain. The altered traits, the real brain change happens the more you meditate. But even if you do, as she said, 8 minutes of loving kindness meditation, it makes you more likely to help someone in need. To give up a chair for someone on crutches, things like that. And in fact, the research on practices that encourage a loving attitude seem to have a more powerful effect right at the beginning than any other kind of meditation. It's as though the mind wanted to learn to love better. This is very important, I think, for society, for our lives, for our communities, for our families. Richie, at University of Wisconsin, developed a kindness program for preschoolers. The kindness program goes like this. You talk about being kind, what it's like, and if someone is kind to you, and you tell the teacher, that kid who was kind gets a sticker in the kindness garden. If you're 3, this is like major payoff. Like, oh man, I got a sticker in the kindness garden. So kids who are in the kindness program, as they go into grade school, turns out that usually as you get into think about it, we put our children in an environment every day where they're rewarded individually for doing better than other kids. And so kids become competitive and very self-centered, except the kids that had the kindness curriculum. So for me, a lot of this has a kind of payoff in how we could be treating our kids differently. Let's start with what Tony Fadell was talking about, the distractions. I mean, today's kids, as he said, have a video babysitter. There are more distractions now than any time in human history for all of us. He made a clear case for that. There's a saying in cognitive science, what information consumes is attention. A wealth of information means a poverty of attention. You can only pay attention to one thing at a time. The book I wrote, Emotional Intelligence, was really an argument for teaching kids social and emotional skills in school. They call it SEL, social emotional learning. I was worried 20 years ago that kids were not getting the right face time. You learn these skills in life. You learn it from your mom and your dad and your siblings and interactions. And today's children are spending more time than ever in human history staring at a screen. They're not having that interaction. So I feel we not only need to teach SEL, we need to do what I witnessed uptown here in Spanish Harlem, PS 112. It's a school for first and second graders. They all come from the housing project right next to the school. It's up against FDR. And those kids have very traumatic lives. One of the teacher told me one day a little girl came into class really upset, and she said, "What happened?" The girl says, "I just saw someone who was shot." And the teacher said to the class, "How many of you know someone who's been shot?" Every hand went up. It's a very traumatic place to be a kid. Half the kids in this class were so-called special needs, ADHD, autism spectrum, whatever. I thought it would be totally chaotic, but the class was very calm and very focused. And the teacher said, "Here's why. Every day they have a session, they call it breathing buddies. You get your favorite stuffed animal and you find a place to lie down on the floor and you put the animal on your belly and you watch it rise on the in-breath, fall on the out-breath, rise on the in-breath, fall." It's mindfulness for 7-year-olds. And it works and they love it. Think about it. Sharon said that the action in mindfulness of breathing is the moment you notice your mind has wandered and you bring it back. Meditation of every kind, mindfulness included, is mental fitness. We put a lot of time into physical fitness, but think about making the mind stronger, strengthening attention, strengthening your simple ability to control what's going on in your mind. The technical term for this is cognitive control. That's what those kids in PS 112 are learning. There was a study done in New Zealand where they followed kids who had been measured for cognitive control, ages 4 to 8. They tracked them down in their 30s, and they found that the kids that were highest in cognitive control, 4 to 8, had much better financial success and better health. And cognitive control was a better predictor than your IQ in childhood or the wealth of the family you grew up in. So this is one way to level the playing field. Think about it. This also doesn't depend on those companies to change the app. It puts the control mechanism in the brain of the person who's using it. Cognitive control. I can pay attention to what I want to when I want to. And I don't think it's just attention we should help kids with. I think that we should help them with compassion, with caring. I also happen to think we should teach them systems thinking, because this generation of children is going to encounter a world where the systems we take for granted, like the environment, are going out of control. They're going to need to be pretty sophisticated in how they handle it. A couple other findings that might interest you that I didn't mention. Therapies that are based on mindfulness, like there's one called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, turn out to be as effective for anxiety and depression than as medications. Now, you may not have heard that before, and there's a good reason. No pharmaceutical company will make a penny from this fact. However, it's important to know. It's not that it'll work for everyone, or for, bipolar might be purely medical, but it's very important to know. What Jon Kabat-Zinn developed, mindfulness-based stress reduction, is extremely helpful for people with chronic pain, for people who have a disease that they have to live with. Because with mindfulness, you change your relationship to the experience of that pain, of the disease symptoms, and that helps you have a better quality of life. This is spreading worldwide now through hospitals and beyond. So mindfulness and meditation is a mental fitness exercise, a mental fitness practice I think should become universal. Let me finish with some questions that I heard the Dalai Lama ask, and I really love them. He said, whenever you face an important decision, ask yourself 3 questions. who benefits? Is it just me or a group? Is it just my group or everyone? And is it just for now or for the future? Thank you.